one more time.
Hey, what's going on, Who Dat Nation? It is yours truly, TJ Jones, the host of the State of the Saints podcast. And welcome to the State of the Saints podcast, Saints News and Saints Q&A edition. Now, normally when I do these shows, we focus on the Who Dat Nation, questions that are given from fans like yourself, and I answer them. And also to talk about some of the news that happened this week in regards to the New Orleans Saints. I mean, we got several stories. Of course, the week kind of started off with the beef between Michael Thomas and wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins, Devontae Parker. Then we heard about Sean Payton getting an endorsement deal with Jordan Brand. And then we know about Jameis Winston, his video that went viral of him putting on his New Orleans Saints helmet and his Saints gear for the very first time. And of course, we got to talk about some of the questions that you all have. So very excited about this show. Very excited to get into it and get in depth. A lot of the videos that I do, they're like 5 to 10 minutes. And normally I do that because I don't want to hold you up. I don't want to keep on beating a dead horse. I want to give you the news, give you my perspective, and get the heck out of there. So we're going to be talking about these stories a little bit in depth. And this might be a little bit longer than normal videos that I do. So the first thing I want to talk about that started the week was Michael Thomas versus Devontae Parker. Now, we all know who Devontae Parker is. If you don't, then, he is the wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins. I think he went to college at Louisville, and he got drafted a year before Michael Thomas in 2015. He was a first-round pick. And Devontae Parker had a really good season, man. This was his first season that he went over 1,000 yards. And the beef actually started between he and Michael Thomas. It came off a question. The question was, which is more tougher? Trying to catch a pass on Patriots cornerback Stephon Gilmore or guarding Michael Thomas as he's trying to catch a pass? And of course, Devontae Parker, he chose A. And I said on the last video, I said I kind of understand what Devontae Parker why he said what he said. He goes up against Stephon Gilmore every year, twice a year. The Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots are in the same division. So that's pretty understandable. The problem what I have with this is you knew Michael Thomas was going to see this. So to me, it looks as if Devontae Parker was trying to be a fire starter. And of course, Michael Thomas took exception to the comment or the choice that Devontae Parker made. And he said, man, I've been lapped you. You've been in the league longer than me. And I put up better numbers than you. And Devontae Parker said, well, you're putting up these big numbers because you get about 300 targets a year. And Michael Thomas then responded and said, man, you can't even get a seat at the table. Now, I got to say, man, some of the people that I seen like going back and forth about this topic and everything like that, especially people like Skip Bayless. Skip Bayless was trying to compare Devontae Parker to Michael Thomas, and he also said that he don't know that much about Michael Thomas. He never seen him. He don't know him if he actually walked past him in the street. Who actually cares? Like, who cares if you don't know what he looks like? You know his production, and I'm smart enough to know that even though I got a lot of respect for Devontae Parker as a wide receiver, and I do believe that if the New Orleans Saints were to get him somehow to come to New Orleans, he would put up big numbers as well. But Michael Thomas is just on a whole nother level. I hate when people try to demean a guy's accomplishments. They talk about Michael Thomas. They say that all he run is short routes. All he run is quick slants. He doesn't have a big route tree. That's a bunch of BS, okay? That is a bunch of BS. And anybody believes that Michael Thomas is not a good receiver because he doesn't run a whole bunch of streak routes is an idiot. And I'm just calling it for what it is. If you ever played the wide receiver position, you know some of the toughest routes are those short routes, okay? That's the reason why sometimes wide receivers do drills where you have the coaches beating on their shoulders and hitting their hands and stuff like that, and they have to still try to catch the ball. That is some of the toughest routes that you're going to run. The cornerback gets 5 yards to jam the wide receiver, to disrupt him from his route. So if he catching the ball within that 5-yard range, he earned that. He earned it. And then he had like 189 targets. Michael Thomas had over 180 targets last season, and he caught 149 of them. That is a very high percentage. So I don't care what you say, no matter who's throwing him the football, he has to catch it, okay? And I guarantee you, if he was dropping more passes than he was getting thrown, then I guarantee you Drew Brees would be looking the other way. So Michael Thomas, even though I feel like, he took it a little bit too far, but I understand how he feels about it. And it's not like Michael Thomas just talks trash on Twitter and don't back it up. That's what I have a problem with. If he was up there talking trash and bashing Devontae Parker and he wasn't putting up the numbers, then I would understand. But Michael Thomas, every single year he's been in the league, he has exceeded expectations. I mean, he catches more passes every single year than he caught the previous year, and he gets better every single year. And not to mention, he was Offensive Player of the Year, the first time a wide receiver has won that award in 17 years. And like I said, Devontae Parker had an outstanding season, but it was his first season going over 1,000 yards. And yeah, you can say stuff like, well, he got Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen throwing him the football. Well, Michael Thomas, he had 3 different quarterbacks throwing him the football. One is, without a shadow of a doubt, a future Hall of Famer, of course, in Drew Brees. But Drew Brees went down 5 games, and his production did not diminish because Drew Brees went down. Teddy Bridgewater, had the same type of statistics over the first couple games that Drew Brees played with Michael Thomas. Teddy Bridgewater pulled up to the same type of identical stats. So his numbers didn't even drop off, okay? So, and then not to mention, Taysom Hill throwing them passes every now and then as well. So this guy had 3 different quarterbacks throwing him the football. So for all those people out there that's just saying, oh, he got a Hall of Famer throwing him the football, miss me with that, okay? Devontae Parker has a lot of work to do. I mean, he started with a good, solid season. And hopefully, because the draft pick of Tua Tagovailoa being a quarterback of the Miami Dolphins, hopefully his numbers will increase. But right now, man, he ain't got no room to talk about Michael Thomas, man, because in reality, Michael Thomas is about leaps and bounds better than him. Like he said, Michael Thomas said, he doesn't have a seat at the table. I mean, he's right at the gate. You know what I'm saying? He's walking up to the house, but he still is not in the house, and he damn sure ain't sat at the table yet. So that's just my opinion on that. We move on to head coach Sean Payton. Sean Payton, as you all know, has an endorsement deal with Jordan Brand. Now, it all started when Sean Payton went out to Michael Jordan's brand new golf course in Florida. He got opportunity to play out there, and it just so happened MJ was out there golfing, and he was just finishing up, and he got an opportunity to meet Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan told Sean Payton that he wanted him to be his first coach on the Jordan Brand. And of course, Sean Payton talked about how big of an honor it was, growing up in Illinois, playing football for the Chicago Bears. Michael Jordan was in the league about 3 or 4 years at the time when Sean Payton was one of those replacement players back in 1987. So I can understand what that meant to Sean Payton being a fan. And we all know Sean Payton likes to wear some exclusive J's on the sidelines, man. We know about the white and gold J's that he had on, man. I mean, he always repping Jordan to the fullest. So this is a great opportunity for him. Now, me personally, man, I don't really care that much about endorsements as long as it don't affect the way he coaches the game, okay? And I made a video. It was the most previous video that I made. And if you have not seen it, go ahead and check it out. It was on Sean Payton, and I gave my thoughts about him actually joining the Jordan Brand, and I kind of transitioned to him as a coach. And, I seen the comments, man. You got a couple people out there upset and saying we got to take the good with the bad. Talking about Sean Payton. He doesn't have a bad record in the playoffs and this, that, and the third. Look, I have no problem with people giving their opinion. Okay, I have no problem with that because that's all I'm doing. I'm giving my opinion. That's what I do every single time I make a video. I give you my opinion. But you have to be honest with yourself. A lot of people, they feel like if they are honest, then they're breaking their allegiance to a person. Like a lot of people feel like if they criticize Drew Brees or they criticize Sean Payton or they criticize the Saints team as a whole, it shows that they're not loyal to the team. I say to hell with all that. I'm extremely loyal to the New Orleans Saints, but at the same time, I'm a realist. And the numbers do not lie. Sean Payton is 8-7 in the playoffs. You can talk about his regular season record, which he won over 130 games. That's cool. We never said that Sean Payton is a bad coach. Well, let's not say we. I never said that Sean Payton is a bad coach. I'm saying when the game is on the line and when the chips are on the table, he folds like a cheap tent. And this has been the narrative over the past, I say about 7 to 8 years. And as a fan of the New Orleans Saints, it is extremely frustrating to watch this team beat some of the elite teams throughout the regular season only to go into the playoffs and lose because Sean Payton overthinks himself. You don't believe me? Check this out. Let's look at the NFC Championship game. Let's talk about before Tommy Lee Lewis and the whole controversial 9 call. Let's focus on that. Okay, I think right before the 2-minute warning, Drew Brees throws a bomb down the field, gives it everything he has, and Ted Ginn Jr. comes down with the pass over 2 defenders. Everybody in the Superdome going absolutely crazy, right? Everybody going crazy. So this sets up first down. You're in the red zone. You're in the red zone. Follow me now. Everybody knows that, okay, the clock is on your side. Instead of you running the football with Mark Ingram or running the football with Alvin Kamara, who was absolutely spectacular in that game, you decide to throw a quick slant to Michael Thomas, and the ball falls on the ground only to stop the clock. Now, a lot of people would say, well, everybody knew they was going to run the football. Who the hell cares? Okay, sometimes it's good to be predictable. It's good to count on the guys that got you there. It's good to count on the offensive line to believe that they can actually block for a running back in order for him to gain a couple yards and keep the clock moving. I mean, it's situations like that. We can even go last season in a wild card game. On a 3rd and 1, you have Latavius Murray, a 6'1" or 6'2", 225-pound running back, and you decide to put Alvin Kamara in a game and do a halfback toss in a game where the linebackers of the Minnesota Vikings wasn't given an inch on the edge. I just did not understand that. When you look at situations like that, that is when I say stuff like he overthinks himself and he does not call good games when it matters most. 8-7 in the playoffs, last time I checked, that's not really good. It's not bad, but it ain't good either. So what I'm saying is Sean Payton needs to change up the game plan. And people like, I think I seen a comment where somebody said, well, that's what got the Saints to the dance, him being that type of play caller. Not necessarily, man. What got the Saints to the dance or the big dance was the fact that when the Saints were the top 5 rushing team in football. I think they were ranked number 3 or 4. Okay, that's what got them to the Super Bowl. But people get things misconstrued. I can care less about regular season victories. I only care about the Saints actually going to the Super Bowl. At the end of the day, regular season victories don't even really matter as much as long as you make it to the playoffs. Back in 2007, the New York Football Giants barely made the playoffs. They were a wild card team, okay? And they ran the table and they knocked off the undefeated New England Patriots. They backed their way into the playoffs, okay? It didn't really matter. Let's look at the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans barely got in the playoffs and were a few plays away from making it to the Super Bowl. So who cares about regular season victories? I don't care about talking about Atlanta Falcon fans or Carolina Panther fans or Tampa Bay Buccaneer fans when it comes to we won the division or we won more games than y'all. It's only so many times that is going to bail you out. I want victories. I want championships. And if you're being real with yourself as a Saints fan, you know as well as I do that the New Orleans Saints had plenty of opportunities to make it to the Super Bowl and did not, and it came from bad play calling. Now, you can live in a world of denial if you want to. You can turn your head. You can talk about these moral victories. You can talk about how much faith and hope you got, but all the faith, all the hope, all the wishing, all the praying is not going to get the Saints where they need to be. They need to run the football. They need to control the time of possession, and they need to stop depending on their 41-year-old quarterback to throw the ball 35 to 40 times a game. It'll probably win you some games because Drew Brees is incredible, but when it matters most, when teams start buckling down and they start to put pressure on Drew Brees right up the center, as we've been seeing for years, that is Drew Brees' Achilles heel, it is going to be hard for them to get over the hump if they refuse to. Okay, you can't let your ego play a huge role in your team, in your play calling and your execution. You got to run the football and you got to count on those guys up front. You got to count on the hog mollies up front to get those blocks in order for Latavius Murray, Dwayne Washington, Ty Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, or whoever running the football to be able to get free. Okay, that's why you pay those guys for it. Throwing the ball all over the place is exciting. It'll have us dancing in our seats. It'll have us dancing in our living rooms. But in reality, it's not going to get us absolutely nowhere. Think about this. Name, for the exception of the St. Louis Rams, the greatest show on turf, name a team that just threw the ball all over the place that you can think of that end up winning championships. Besides the St. Louis Rams, and you can't even say the Kansas City Chiefs last season because they ran the football throughout the playoffs. The St. Louis Rams. You can't talk about the San Diego Chargers back in the day with El Coryell. You can talk about the 49ers, but they had Roger Craig in them. So forget about all that. You cannot make it to the big dance. You are not going to win championships if you do not commit to the run. Point blank, period. But Sean Payton, once again, I believe is a good coach, but at the same time, he's going to have to change a little bit of his philosophy, and he's going to have to commit to the run if he's going to get this team anywhere. I'm just being real. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston on social media, he had little bit of an unboxing, if you will. You know, he showed the world, that his New Orleans Saints helmet and gear came to his home, and, he was really excited about it, man. Jameis Winston was really excited. He sung a little bit of Who Dat. He need to work on his little Who Dat chant, but we'll let him slide. But Jameis Winston, it seems like he is really embracing it. He has a campaign going called #Resurrection, meaning he's going to resurrect his career. Looking at Jameis Winston, I can see this guy as a leader. Be that as it may, he had some issues when he was in college and stuff like that. I feel like he had a little bit of a struggle trying to find himself. But I really think that Jameis Winston, being in the New Orleans Saints locker room, is going to help him. And I really feel like he is going to be a really good quarterback in the future. The thing about Jameis Winston, and I feel bad for him, is the fact that he went throughout his whole life, my opinion, not living by a certain set of rules. Okay, I feel like when certain people are really good or really talented, you have coaches, you have people that enable them, and they don't give them the actual factual. I look at when he was at Florida State, Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher is a really good football coach, but I really feel like he felt like his success was conjoined to Jameis Winston. So he allowed Jameis Winston to get away with a whole lot of things. Probably wasn't telling Jameis Winston that much about the turnovers, because even though Jameis Winston won, I think he won the Heisman Trophy his junior year, he came back and he really didn't have a really solid year. He was turning the ball over quite quite heavily. And I feel like Jimbo Fisher really didn't tell him much of anything. So I feel like when you are a good player, I mean, people just kind of ride your coattails and they be like, okay, this guy's going to get me where I need to be. And they probably weren't as critical on Jameis as they should be. And when he transitioned to the NFL, he probably felt like, well, I mean, I never had an issue with that before. Nobody ever told me anything before, so he probably didn't feel like it was such a big deal. But then you have somebody like Bruce Arians come in, after a few coaches that Jameis Winston lost. Now he comes in and he has zero tolerance on it. And I feel like he's very impatient. So he didn't get an opportunity to actually right the ship. He just was like, man, let's just get through this season and we'll, get another quarterback. I always felt that way. I don't think that Bruce Arians really cared that much for Jameis Winston. But now I feel like Jameis Winston can come to New Orleans and he can take a back seat and he can watch Drew Brees and he can, get some mental reps, man. Watching Drew Brees work, watching Drew Brees decision making, because we all know that Drew Brees rarely ever turns over the ball and he rarely ever takes sacks. So I think by watching Drew Brees and watch him work and watch him be the professional that he is, it will help Jameis Winston. And not to mention, man, he don't have to worry so much about throwing the ball down the field a million gazillion times like Bruce Arians wanted him to. I think a lot of the plays that he did had a lot to do with the play calling of Bruce Arians. Bruce Arians wanted him to push the ball down the field. We all know that the Saints passing game is almost like an extension of their running game. They're not going to throw the ball 30, 40 yards down the field a million times a game. They're going to get those short, immediate routes. They're going to take what the defense give them, and they're going to continue to move the ball downfield. They're going to nickel and dime it, penny and quarter it down the field. And I feel like with Jameis Winston, that'll give him opportunities to actually see the field, and it also will help him on his deep balls down the field. So, do I feel like Jameis Winston is going to be the future of the New Orleans Saints? That remains to be seen, man. I want to see great competition between the New Orleans Saints quarterbacks, Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, okay? I feel like the Saints want Taysom Hill to be the future of the New Orleans Saints. We heard the news stories. We heard from Jay Glazer talking about how Taysom Hill is the future of the Saints in the eyes of Sean Payton. He really likes him. Of course, they committed to him with the contract deal. But at the same time, you do not just give him the keys to the car. You do not just give him the keys to the city. You make him earn it. And you earn it by going out there and performing at practice and also performing in games. But if Jameis Winston can cut down the turnovers, I mean, he had 5,000 yards passing last season. If he can cut down the turnovers and become a better decision maker, that is a recipe for a resurrection. And I feel like Jameis Winston can resurrect his career. But it's going to have to take some time. It's going to have to take some mental reps. And it's going to have to take him being humble, coming into training camp, and being on the sidelines and focusing on how he can become a better player. But those are the top stories from the New Orleans Saints from this week. And now we're going to transition to some of the questions that you all may have with the New Orleans Saints. And thank you all for submitting your questions. And if you don't know, you can submit your questions on Facebook, facebook.com, search The State of the Saints Podcast. You can inbox me, or you can go to stateofthesaints@gmail.com. The first question comes from my guy, Toddy Abear. Toddy Abear says, I believe we have a good year. Health-wise, our defense will be better than last season. What do you say? Would love to see Davenport and Rankins play a full season. Thank you, Toddy. I really do believe that. I feel like if the Saints defense can stay healthy throughout the season, and they don't, really get nicked up too much. Honestly, we know how it is, man. Wishing that nobody on the defensive side of the ball gets hurt, that's just wishful thinking. Somebody is going to get hurt. But if a guy like Davenport and Rankins can play a 16-game season, that is a recipe for success. The Saints defense is really pretty good, man. They give us some big plays at towards the end of the game, but nevertheless, they play really well. That stretch when Drew Brees went down, that probably was like the best stretch of defense from the New Orleans Saints I've seen in probably almost a decade. So I think if they can just put it together, they play together, and I think they have chemistry on their side this season. I think they will have a successful season from the defense. Next question comes from Keith McGilliard, and he says, "Well, every year I feel confident in our Saints, but I always second guess our cornerbacks. Do you honestly feel or think our weak spot is the cornerbacks this year again?" To be honest with you, no. I don't think that our weak spot is the cornerbacks. I feel like our weak spots is the linebacker position. I feel like we have two decent linebackers in Kiko Alonso and Demario Davis. Demario Davis is a little bit above decent, but I feel like the linebackers need to get a little bit better. We don't know what Zach Bond is going to bring to the table, the rookie out of Wisconsin, but I feel like they just need to work on a little bit of chemistry. There was a lot of injuries in the linebacker room, throughout last season. So hopefully those guys can stay healthy. Guys like Caden Ellis can come and play. Guys like Kiko Alonso can stay healthy. If you get those guys out there and they're performing at a high level, then I think you'll be okay. And I can't forget about Alex Anzalone as well. I mean, somebody that plays really well, plays sideline to sidelines, does some really good things on the field, but just can't stay healthy. The cornerbacks, I feel like they will be okay. I think the New Orleans Saints cornerbacks are probably some of the best that they've had in a long time. I think by re-signing Janoris Jenkins, I think that was a really good move. Marshawn Lattimore, he's playing with empty pockets this season, so you're probably going to get the best Marshawn Lattimore that you'll probably ever see, probably since his rookie season. Marcus Williams, I feel like with the addition of Malcolm Jenkins being a mentor to him, I feel like he's going to be able to see the field a little bit better. Patrick Robinson, towards the end of the season, he did some really good things in the nickel. PJ Williams, I'm interested to see if the Saints are going to transition him to safety more so than playing the nickel. And we all know that CJ Gardner-Johnson, a young, confident safety who played in a nickel last season, I think that he is going to be really good, and he's going to make that huge step from year one to year two. So you look at the secondary as a whole, man, you got to be happy with what you see. I think the combination of them being together so long and the chemistry and the players that they actually have back there, I think that the New Orleans Saints cornerbacks are going to be pretty good. But thank you very much, Keith, for your question. Next, coming from my guy, Kieran Osborne. He says, "Do you think Sean Payton needs to open up the playbook more to our running backs and so he can take the ball out of Drew Brees' hands from time to time?" Kieran, man, you just hit the nail on the head, man. I talked a little bit about that when I was talking about Sean Payton. He definitely got to commit to the run. You got to commit to the run because it controls the time of possession. I feel like the Saints lose a lot of games sometimes when they have leads. It's because they're throwing the football, and sometimes, you catch the ball, the clock moving, you miss a pass, or you overthrow a guy, it's incomplete, it stops the clock, and it plays into the hand of your opponent because it's giving your opponent X amount of opportunities to come back out there and make things happen. The Saints have to make the game shorter. Sometimes the New Orleans Saints games go way too long, and those games go way too long when you look at Drew Brees throwing the ball 40 times. Or you're looking at, all these passing plays and these plays that actually, could possibly stop the clock. So they need to run the football to control the time of possession. And also, man, you need to wear down the defense. And you can't have the defense out there playing strong towards the third and the fourth quarter. Allow somebody like Latavius Murray to get between those tackles and lean on some of those bigger guys. He's a big guy himself. So that's going to wear down the defense. Give Alvin Kamara opportunity to run between the tackles. And Dwayne Washington, man, unload the clip. Don't save nothing. Don't save nothing for the other team. Just go out there and pound the football, man. And I'm not saying you got to be out here like it's 1961, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But I'm saying you got to have a healthy balance, man, where teams don't know what you're going to do. I think the predictability sometimes of the New Orleans Saints cost them year after year. So if they commit to the run and, they don't shy away from it just because you're not getting instant results, I think they'll be okay. Last question comes from Brian Lampert, and he just simply asked, Why Winston? Well, number one, Jameis Winston is a decent quarterback. I don't want to say he's a great quarterback, but he's decent right now. You know what I'm saying? Decent. Sometimes he plays really good. He just up and down. And not to mention he's young. He's a young quarterback that has a lot of issues. And honestly, Brian, if you look at Drew Brees and Jameis Winston's stats, for the first 4 years of their career, they're almost identical, man. I mean, the Drew Brees that we see today was not the Drew Brees that was in San Diego. Drew Brees had to transition to be the great quarterback that he is today, but it took some growing pains, man. Marty Schottenheimer used to really get on Drew Brees for the mistakes in the decision making. So what Drew Brees did was, man, he settled down. He got into the system of Sean Payton, and the rest is history. Who's to say that Jameis Winston can't right the ship? Who's to say that Jameis Winston can't get his career back on track? You do not throw for 5,000 yards regardless to how you throw them. You don't throw for 5,000 yards and you're a terrible quarterback. I just don't believe that. I just feel like he just needs to cut down on the turnovers and he just needs to see the field. I think sometimes he just wants to make a play so bad and he wants to make the play to win the game in the first quarter. You can't do that, man. You got to take what the defense gives you. And sometimes if, you got to play your little Alex Smith game where you just dinking and dunking, that's cool. You know what I'm saying? Because you're still moving the football. Jameis Winston coming to New Orleans Saints will be, I think it is going to save his football life. And I think that if he plays good enough, we might be looking at the future of the franchise. No disrespect to Taysom Hill, but if Jameis Winston comes in, throwing the football all over the place, not turning the ball over, and we all know his arm talent, I have to say Taysom Hill is going to be in some very serious trouble, man, and him being the future of the Saints is going to be in jeopardy. But I want to say thank you all for your questions. Thank you so much for your time. This has been the State of the Saints podcast, Saints Q&A, and Saints News Edition. Thank you very much. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com, search The State of the Saints Podcast. Also, facebook.com, search The State of the Saints Podcast. And also check out the State of the Saints Podcast audio version. You might not be able to check it out on YouTube. You might be on the go. You might be jogging or at the gym or at work, and you can't pull it up on YouTube. You can check it out in audio form. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts, and available on Alexa. All you have to do is say, "Hey Alexa, play the State of the Saints podcast," and it will play the most previous episode for you. Till next time, all I gotta say is,